Paul, good to see you, man. Everybody else, Justin Morgan here again with Wood and Morgan. I'm speaking with Paul Yuan of Greg Beamer and Associates. He's a broker in Southern California. Paul, will you just give yourself an introduction, talk about what you do and who you help?
Absolutely, Justin. Thanks so much for having me today. Paul Yuan, basically a dental broker, recently a licensed dental broker here in California.
Congratulations.
Thanks so much. 20 years here in the Southern California dental industry with a mix of both dental manufacturing, dental regional management, DSO management. And so that's my background. And today I'm helping dentists, specifically sellers here in Southern California, transact their practices, and also, of course, assisting those buyers and making sure those buyers are successful in the process.
Right, right. And so at this point in the year, I'm interviewing people throughout Southern California and just the West Coast about 2023. Can you give me a high-level overview of how the year went? I mean, there was some economic difficulties, and I want to hear from you.
Absolutely. 23 was actually, ironically, a phenomenal year for us. It was a very good year. Thank you. And, basically for us as a brokerage, we were really, really focused on working with really organized sellers. We were really, focused on working with sellers that had established patients, established staff, good, strong net cash flow. So they'll be able to support a good buyer. And so in doing that or making that focus last year, it's really helped us become more and more successful and realizing a better year and realizing more successful transactions between buyers and sellers. So, in that light, I think I had a lot of fun doing that. And I think a lot of buyers and sellers were happy doing that with us.
That's great. And so, that's fantastic that you had a great year. What were some of the difficulties that you faced?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you kind of highlighting that. I would say one of our biggest challenges last year were what I would call both buyers and sellers were guilty of this. I think guys that wanted to experiment with what I would call new professionals that came into the industry. And no offense, right, Justin? I mean, I have a lot of respect and I give a lot of credit to professionals that try to get involved in our space. But I
Yeah.
think from what I've experienced, and again, I'm just being very transparent, from what I experienced last year, I think there were a handful of new professionals, new lenders, what have you, that operate in our space. And they didn't have all the knowledge, they didn't have all the tool sets necessary to support the buyer and the seller, in the process. And I think personally, what I experienced, and I'm sure you experienced some of this, is we ended up educating the educators, right? And so they're able to do their jobs. And I would say that from that experience alone, I would say just be very careful, right, as a buyer or a seller, because you're doing this maybe once or twice in your career, and
Yeah.
experimenting, with newcomers, I think is always kind of, it's risky. And from my experience, I think it prolongs the process unnecessarily. But I mean, that's just to share some insight with you. But what are your thoughts on that?
Um, if I was buying professional services, I don't want to pay for their training, right? And I don't want to pay out of pocket, and I also don't want to pay in terms of back end risk. I tend to agree with you. I think in this industry there are a few things that seem very straightforward, but the devil's in the details in terms of truly protecting yourself and everybody that you're working with. It takes a little bit more experience and at least a few years, like in the trenches, to actually understand what's going on. But I've seen a lot of it too, even at like the DSO level, like new entrants that don't know anything, right? And they were maybe in a sales job like a year ago in a completely different industry, and now they're trying to do multi-million-dollar deals, and it's a little scary because they convince some people to give them a shot. So
Right, absolutely. And that's the thing, right? Because if some of these professionals are marketing themselves or positioning themselves a certain way to support you in a transaction, and they don't have all the skill sets necessary to make it successful, I think from our perspective, both from the brokerage and the attorney side, from the legal side, it makes it challenging, right? Because then it prolongs the transactions. It can hurt the expectations that we set along the way. So yeah, I mean, as a whole, I would just say, if you're a buyer or seller right now, be very cognizant that you're doing this once or twice in your career. Don't
yeah,
experiment with people that may not have all the experience. Really do the research, really understand the background of the professionals you surround yourselves with. Guys like Wood and Morgan, we're highly reliant on you guys, and because of what you do and how quickly you're able to do it. So, and we appreciate that. So ultimately, that's what it breaks down to for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. I will make one more comment as we're bashing the friendly competition. Um, just like, I've seen the rise of people that are trying to take the place of brokers, like on internet sites and whatnot. And it certainly does adjust expectations. And there is a value to the professional services on every level, and that needs to be acknowledged. So yeah, I think we'll probably see that in perpetuity, just because the market's pretty hot. So they may come and they may fall. So what about some headwinds? Excuse me, some tailwinds last year?
No, absolutely. And I think from last year, you probably experienced this yourselves. But basically, tailwinds last year, from what we experienced, was the interest rates, and I won't comment on this just on a very general level, but interest rates, when they started to stabilize last year, I think that's what really kind of pushed some more stimulus through the market. And I would say that was one of the things that we experienced as a brokerage. Was we felt that as those interest rates stabilized, we found that our buyers were more confident in making that next step. So
Yeah,
if I were to share an observation from last year, I think that was one of the observations that I've had. So, I mean,
cool.
what are your thoughts?
No, I think that's interesting. I'm curious, from your vantage point, and I might want to talk to a few other people about this, but when they stabilized, did it cram down sellers' expectations for purchase prices, or did the banks respond by extending the terms out and giving more generous terms so they could meet the costs for the purchases? I think it might have been a little bit of both.
You're
Um,
right.
yeah, yeah,
You're right. I think
um,
it depended on the situation. So,
yeah. What about your favorite story or your best win last year?
this was something you and I personally were involved on, and I won't get
Yeah,
into too many details, but I'll give the high level, the high points.
yeah,
But there was a fairly large transaction in the Inland Empire.
yeah,
And in this one particular case, I've never been on a case where we had three attorneys involved. And we had an attorney involved with the seller, an attorney involved with the buyer, and then we
yeah,
also had a fairly prominent attorney involved with the landlord. And then all of a sudden there were issues with the building itself.
yeah,
And one thing that struck me about this transaction was how much the seller was looking forward to retirement, but yet we had to go through all these details, right? So between
yeah,
you and I, getting on the phone, through emails, through texts, through smoke signals, right?
yeah,
Between all these different methods, we push that transaction along. And I think between fortitude and diligence, you and I were able to finish that transaction. And that was probably the one transaction that I was most satisfied by, because it took so many phone calls and emails and late night calls and weekend calls to make it work. But yeah, I would say that was the one kind of story that struck me and made me really, it gave me satisfaction in being in this role. So
yeah. I think I left the country after that.
that's right. You're like, hey, Paul, dude, peace out, man. I'm out.
And look, what are you looking forward to in 2024?
24, I'll tell you what, dude, it's for us, I see a lot of
Yeah,
outstanding opportunities, honestly. As those interest rates stabilize, at the latter half of last year, we're really, really looking forward to, even higher quality transactions this year. We believe that as long as we're working with, professionals like yourself, and we're able to surround ourselves with experienced professionals, lenders, CPAs, we'll be able to get it done. And so I'm very confident about this year, more so than last year, is how I feel. But how do you feel about that?
I think this year will be interesting in that you'll see a lot more smaller practice sales in greater volumes, as people look to retire and they've got a smaller practice and it's less than the cost of a startup. Now those might just get popped off the market really quickly, because so many people are looking. But I think that it feels like there's a ton of buyers in Los Angeles. There's not a ton of um, opportunities for them to acquire. So it'll be interesting throughout the country. I think it's all strong and pretty stable. And so folks willing to move and be really flexible are going to win in terms of finding the business quickly and closing on it. So it'll be interesting. And I also think, and I'm going to make a prediction here, I think that interest rates will drop by half a percent to a full percent by November. And I think that that's going to happen, and it's going to coincide with the election.
I don't disagree with you there. I think the political atmosphere is going to change the banking atmosphere. And you're right. I think all of this is going to stimulate kind of more activity. And you're right on the other end too, where at least here in Southern California, we may experience a little more, smaller activity and those kind of things. So,
yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Paul. This has been great.
Yeah. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Perfect.